our next segment of our show is actually a live interview with a very good friend, Pete Fletzer, author. He is a writer. He is a lot of things. I was telling him before, I think you're a very intelligent man. You're a loyal father. You're a respectable husband because he was patient through the sound check. And now we are talking about the three of us and Pete. He joins us live on Beyond the Blast Doors to talk about Duel of Fates, his fan fiction that he's crafted of the Phantom Menace, and a kind of a reimagining of this story. And we are taking a look at just the first 40 pages right now. And Pete, you're with us now. So glad you're with us. How have you been?
I've been great. I've been really great. I've been enjoying listening to you guys. That 2 weeks off actually helped me. I was able to get caught up with some of your back episodes. So it was unfortunate to not have you live, but it was good to be listening to you. But I've been really good. I've been having fun trying to get the word out about this crazy little passion project I put a year into for some strange reason. So,
well, I think it's so great to see how Pete he's got this piece out. He's becoming more interactive on social media. He's growing his brand on Twitter. You can interact with him at Fletzer Pete on social media, so be sure you check him out. He's a lot of fun, and he's always trying to convince you that the Clone Army will return in Episode 9. But
I'm pulling for it.
We're talking about Duel of Fates, and we're really fortunate. Pete came on the show a couple weeks ago and was like, hey, this is what we're doing, and we'd like to talk about it. And we asked some very broad, sweeping questions. But this week, we kind of want to go dive in deep, the first 40 pages or so, with some background. And the way we've done this, Pete, and of course, if anyone wants to read your story, they can find this on PeteFletzer.com. But the first 4 chapters are kind of like a long prologue in the sense that you're setting up what we understand to have happened in the movie. We're going back 4 years before, 3 years before, 2 years before, a year before, and you start with Anakin Skywalker on Tatooine with Shmi at the moment where they've just been bought by Watto. And I thought it was a really interesting choice that you start with Anakin because a lot of people will argue that even though it is about a continuation of the Skywalker saga, Anakin doesn't always seem like the focal point of the prequel movies. Yeah. I want to ask you, though, there's a moment where Anakin uses the Force while assembling a droid. Can you talk about why you wanted to start with Shmi and Anakin being purchased and why it was so crucial that you show a Force moment with Anakin right off the top?
Yeah, it's funny. A friend of mine named Eric Montaz, who's been my editor, and he was sort of my coach and plot hole finder. When he read the first chapter, it's funny. He said, I'm really surprised that you had Anakin using the Force in the first chapter. And so what I've done with the story is the first 4 chapters are essentially 4 very short stories to introduce all of our characters, and I felt like we met Anakin in the Phantom Menace film. We knew very little about him, but I felt like it was an interesting opportunity to show, in my perspective, my sort of vision of his story is that he's always had this Force ability, and we've seen it in some other characters and some of the content that we've seen over the years. But it's totally unharnessed, and to him, it's just this thing that he has. And the point that I make there with his mother in the first chapter is she's frightened by it. She has no idea. She's worried. In fact, an interesting phrase, an interesting quote that I gave her is that if the wrong people find out that you could do it, that you could do this, they would take you away from me, and I'm not sure I could live with that. And what's interesting about that is, as we all know, spoiler alert, the Jedi take him away from her. And the question is, are they the wrong people, right? So just to kind of start with him just being himself, and the Force is just part of what he does. That's the way he takes on the very first chore that Watto gives him, is he does it with the Force. He does it quietly. He does it behind everybody's back. He doesn't want anybody to see it, but it's just sort of part of him. It's the way he does things. And to me, that's really interesting. And it also leads to the potential to see, I don't know that I would ever write this, but some of his training and how he has to take this thing that's always been a part of him and do something with it.
I like the idea of having Anakin have the Force moment, just because it kind of reminds me of like in Harry Potter, before Harry could master magic, he had that experience and random experiences like letting the snake out through the glass and other moments in the book where he had this ability, but there was no explanation for how it happened. And I love how you give that to Anakin, because it really does give you the opportunity to view Anakin as kind of a weapon. I mean, he has this power. He doesn't know how to control it. There's no explanation. And like you just said, complemented so well with Shmi having a type of fear and the irony that plays out through your version of the Phantom Menace, and then, of course, what we see on screen with the movie. The next chapter, I'm sorry, Pete, what was that?
No, go for it.
I never want to cut you off. We're hundreds of miles away. I do want to go on to the next chapter. You had something really brief, Jesse?
Yeah, I just want to say that I fact for that particular chapter, the one thing that I thought was phenomenal is you kind of gave a humanizing trait to Watto. You know, that moment where he kind of hides a smirk because about Anakin's kind of like I don't know, his spunk, he's kind of a kid and everything, and he's just like, you get the impression that Watto actually likes this kid.
I always felt, I agree. I always felt that Watto liked Anakin, and it was one of the reasons why he didn't want to give him up. I mean, sure, a young slave is probably more valuable than an older slave, but I felt like there's always a soft spot, and hopefully if you continue reading, you'll also see some other characters a little bit differently. I always felt like characters like Jar Jar were, I hate to say it, misunderstood, but I tried to position him a little bit differently. But I'm glad to hear you say that Watto piece worked, because that was really what I wanted to get across, was Watto, long term. I mean, we even see it right in Attack of the Clones when he's just happy to see Anakin again. So
the next chapter that you have highlights a young Queen Amidala. If I read this correctly, it's as she's becoming the queen. David, what did you wanted to ask something about that, right?
I absolutely loved this chapter. I really like the behind the scenes we get, how she built a relationship with Sheev Palpatine, who kind of is already turning his plan in motion for what's going to happen in the future. I love how you characterized him, Pete, when he's talking to the family and his lips are curling. How did you come up with this story, though, about how the humans got to this planet Naboo and their relationship with the Gungans? Because in my mind, and we were talking about this a little bit before the show started, I've been rereading the Hitchhiker's Guide, and in the second book, they take this one planet takes all of their worthless people, telephone sanitizers and marketing interns, and puts them on a spaceship and promises them a new land, and they send them off to this planet that then becomes Earth. So that's kind of what I had in my mind as I was reading what you were doing. But how did you put this together?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I was also re-listening to the entire Hitchhiker series during the summer, so it probably influenced me in one way or another. But it's interesting. I've kind of lost track, quite frankly, between what came from my head and what I read on Wikipedia. But I do know that there is something about the initial population left their home planet because of a revolution or a war, and so I embellished a little bit that how they ended up where they were and kind of trapped there and no long-term plan. But and I think it's kind of interesting too, because it sort of sets the tone with the Gungans from 1,000 years ago. It isn't something that just happened recently. It's sort of they're seen as invaders even still 1,000 years later.
And it's to me, it's fascinating how the Gungans in your story, they even give up some of their religious ceremonies because of the way the planet's changing with these humans now living on it.
Yeah, and it's kind of this concept that I think we've always seen I think back to the very first Star Wars movie in 1977, is this technology versus nature, and the Force is always sort of plays this nature piece, and this interesting concept that perhaps the Gungans were intimidated or worried, and they kind of opted to not fight. But as we all know, of course, they do have that ability to fight, but they opted against it then. I don't know why I did that, but I think it works well for the story.
Yeah. I think so too, because you portray both the humans, the Nabooians, and the Gungans as being like peaceful people that are trying to bluff each other out through intimidation, so they don't accidentally, get their entire civilization destroyed.
I want to remind everybody that they can be reading along with us on this journey through Duel of Fates, a fan fiction by Pete Fletzer, petefletzer.com. You can download that in PDF, and another format that I'm feeling off the top of my head, Pete. You have like two formats so you can download it. It's really convenient.
Yes, thank you.
Everyone likes options these days.
Hey, I don't want to choose for you. You choose which way you want to read this 120,000 words that some former Star Wars Galaxy author decided to throw at you.
I mean, we're making our way, and it's an absolute thrill. And I want to mention that I think the timing with this fan fiction just works out so well. Obviously, the 20th anniversary of The Phantom Menace is inspiring a lot of works, and I'm really excited to, based on how you've written about Padme in this nugget, and as we progress through your story, how it kind of syncs up with what we learn in E.K. Johnson's Queen Shadow, the Padme novel that just recently came out. And it's just interesting to see different people's takes on Padme, her handmaidens, her circle, a 14-year-old in charge of an entire planet. That is unfathomable in our reality, but in Star Wars, it works. And it's really exciting to see how you pan it out, how you continue to work out Padme through the story.
And Pete, this is one of my favorite things you've written in the 4 chapters I've read so far. You say that the human citizens of Naboo believed that the childlike innocence would give him the ability to lead without the influence of the bitterness of age. I don't know where that came from, but that really stuck out. That's like something you'd put at the bottom of your email signature or something, just to really drive home.
Feel free if you like it, put it down there at the bottom of your emails. No, that it's funny that David mentioned that the timing of all the other things going out. One of the challenges of writing a piece of fan fiction like this, especially one that's not a short story where I'm literally taking on an entire film and giving backstory that I believe, or not believe, but sort of in my own headcanon, is to see if and how it will line up. And I think that's one of the challenges that I throw out to anybody who wants to read it, is kind of checking your deep knowledge of canon at the door, because there are certain places where it does deviate, especially as some of these stories come out. In my when you read my version of The Phantom Menace here, Sifo Dyas actually plays a pretty decent sized role in my version of the story. And of course, just the other day, we saw now that the audio play is coming out with Count Dooku, and it features Sifo Dyas. So it should be interesting to see if I totally blew that, or at the very least, there's an opportunity to look at it from a certain point of view, right?
No, I really like it, and I appreciate you mentioning that, because I feel like the prequels are just getting so much more exploration right now. Really excited for that audiobook and to see Sifo Dyas play out with all this, because the first thing I thought of as I learned how you had him integrated in your story was David's theory all along that Attack of the Clones should have really been this like suspense thriller mystery around who Sifo Dyas was and how this Clone War, this clone army was developed. And it's just kind of fun to see how fans from across the world, there's threads that they're similar, like people's minds go the same place sometimes.
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I hope people get out of this story is, again, a different way to look at it. I always felt that Sifo Dyas was one of those just sort of thrown out names. It was a plot convenience, but to kind of see why, what sort of made him decide that it was worth commissioning a clone army. And I also, one of the things you'll find hopefully in the story is that I go a little bit into the mind of Darth Maul. To me, I've always felt he was the most wasted on-screen villain. He's always been one of my favorite characters. I freaked out when he showed up again in Solo. And to be able to provide at least a little perspective from my point of view, or from my headcanon about him in this story, is something I'm excited. And that's actually the 4th chapter. And that's where if you have a real issue with canon, you are going to potentially have an issue with my story at that point, because that's where I begin to do some exploration. It's not so far outside the lines that it'll throw you off, but it is a little bit of a different take on the Maul Sidious relationship.
And just to verify, it's Dooku Jedi Lost is the name of that audiobook that is going to be narrated by a full cast covering Asajj Ventress, Dooku, and her.
I can't wait for that.
It's going to be really spectacular, and it's the first audiobook only that we've gotten from Del Rey Star. We're so excited for that. Loved your exploration in Darth Maul. And real quick, this is going to be the last question, I think, because we're running out of time.
Sure.
But Pete, can you break down the fact that when you take a moment to look into Qui Gon and Obi-Wan Kenobi, you take the chance to showcase how the Jedi recruit younglings into the Order? Can you kind of break down your approach to Obi-Wan Kenobi, Qui Gon Jinn in this prologue?
Sure. Yeah, I thought it was a great opportunity to get to know Obi-Wan and Qui Gon's relationship, and of course, Master and Apprentice is coming out. All these
Yes.
great books were
Yeah.
announced after I started my ideas here, but that's great. I'm glad it's coming out. But I wanted to kind of show, one of the recurring themes, and it's kind of a dark theme, and maybe that's one of the things you'll take from Duel of the Fates is that it does take sort of a more a political or in some cases a little bit darker look. And while that particular chapter is about digging down into level 1313 to find an infant who's been called through the Force to become a Jedi, there's a recurring theme, and you'll see it in all four of those opening sort of mini stories about sort of this sort of I don't want to say manipulation of children, because I think what's interesting about the entire Phantom Menace story to me, especially as I brought it to life, is it is about manipulating people. It is about trying to get what you want out of people. But if you think about the children who are sort of taken to become Jedi, making Palpatine working to get Queen Amidala elected, what's in it for him? Darth Sidious recruiting Maul, what's in it for him? As opposed to, I think as parents or as even just sort of responsible adults, we like to think that when we give a child something, it's so that they can grow and get what they want out of it and become who they want to be. But if you look at the Jedi, if you look at the Sith, if you look at even Palpatine and Amidala, it's to get something that they want out of it, and it's kind of a dark undertone. But I think it's important to tell that story about maybe where the Jedi had failed or where the Sith had that opportunity. But I did really enjoy spending a little time with Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon on a short little mission on their own, and just to sort of show some of the banter and some of the things that Obi-Wan, I think, took from Qui-Gon to become the great Jedi that he became.
Just so much, and I love it. And I feel like so many of these conversations still apply, whether or not your fan fiction would have ever come to fruition. There's such fun conversations to explore when you apply them back to the movie. So just so much fun. Really enjoyed this conversation. I don't think that we have any questions left, but real quick though, from the live chat, Patrick, Gannon 136 wants to ask, will there be a sequel to this fan fiction? Will you Attack of the Clones?
I've thought about it, but I don't know, man. I'd love to hear. I'll wait and see how people respond to this one before. But I've also thought about, possibly doing a Star Wars fan fiction in a different part of the universe that's related. I wouldn't go Benioff and Weiss 1,000 years forward. I'd love to explore some different portions of the galaxy. So maybe that'll be my next bit.
Wonderful. Well, Pete, thank you so much for joining us again. PeteFletzer.com is where you can find Duel of the Fates, a Phantom Menace fan fiction that is tough to get out there, but really cool cover art, great story. We mentioned more than 500 pages of Star Wars goodness. What we're going to do moving forward is we're going to do a reading club type of thing where it's once a month. We'll dive into the next chapter, the next chunk of it. Pete and I will do that together, and then we'll have him back on the show kind of just to do an abridged live interview, and of course we'll always tease back to that main interview. So if you want just an hour of him gushing about his masterpiece, that's where you'll go. Cliff Notes will be here live on the live show or on podcast. Pete, thank you so much again for joining us, man.
Thank you. Take care.
We'll see you soon, Pete. Pete Fletzer joining us live on Beyond the Blast Doors.
Thank you for watching Beyond the Blast Doors. Be sure to subscribe to our channel. Don't forget, give us a thumbs up and leave a comment. Beyond the Blast Doors, a Star Wars conversation.